Welcome to Veteran to Veteran, show that deals with veteran issues and little historic issues sometimes, as you'll see. I'm Conrad Kaskowski with the Plymouth American Legion Post, along with Dwayne Wick, also with the Plymouth American Legion. And Dwayne, we always introduce ourselves as members of the American Legion. However, I don't believe we ever explained anything about the history of the American Legion. So could you give us the what, where, and how of the American Legion start?
Okay. Well, a group of 20 officers who served in the American Expeditionary Forces, or the AEF, in France during World War I is credited with founding the Legion. The AEF headquarters asked the officers to suggest ideas as to how to improve troop morale. One officer, Lieutenant Colonel Theodore Roosevelt Jr., proposed an organization of veterans. In February of 1919, the group formed a temporary committee and selected several hundred officers who had the confidence and respect of the whole Army. About 1,000 officers and enlisted men attended the Paris caucus in March 1919. They adopted a temporary constitution and the name the American Legion. The group also elected an executive committee to complete the organization's work, and it considered each soldier of the AEF a member of the Legion.
Okay, just a reminder, folks, we do not have electronic teleprompters, so we use the old-fashioned paper method, okay? We want to make sure that we're giving you correct information. So now, Dwayne, at some time, this idea of the American Legion comes back to the United States, and then what happened?
Okay, so in May of 1919, the Legion had a second organized caucus in St. Louis. It completed the Constitution, and it made plans for a permanent organization, setting up a temporary headquarters in New York City. Congress granted the Legion a national charter in September 1919. The first national convention convened in Minneapolis on November 10th through the 12th, 1919, adopting a permanent constitution and elected officers to head the organization. Delegates also voted to locate the Legion's national headquarters in Indianapolis, Indiana, where it resides today.
Dwayne, could you give us the main purpose of the American Legion?
Okay, our main purpose, the American Legion provides life-changing assistance and guidance for veterans, military personnel, their families and communities in thousands of ways every day around the world. Help comes in the form of personal assistance, cash grants, donated goods, disaster relief, labor networking, volunteerism, and advocacy.
Well, every organization places has a motto. What's the motto of the American Legion?
Okay, well, we say we honor those who came before us, which means the American Legion pays a perpetual respect for all past military sacrifices to ensure that they are never forgotten by new generations. And the American Legion's motto is Veterans Strengthening America.
Dwayne, I know the American Legion has, it's called the 4 pillars as their statement of purpose and commitment. And this is really as pillars are, the foundation of the American Legion.
Right.
And could you briefly tell us what are those 4 pillars?
Okay, the first pillar is VA&R, which is Veteran Affairs and Rehabilitation. And it formulates and recommends to the National Executive Committee of the American Legion policies, plans, and programs on direct assistance, outreach, and support for veterans and their families with the Department of Veterans Affairs, or the VA, claims and benefits, health care, memorial affairs, and women veteran programs to ensure that they receive the highest quality of care from the VA for their injuries and illnesses occurred from their military service. So the second pillar, national security. The Legion is an organization of veterans who fought for freedoms, which they are dedicated to keeping and preserving. As one of the four pillars, it was founded on, the Legion believes national security is upheld by keeping a well-funded Department of Defense, a good quality of life for troops, and a sensible transition between service and separation. Americanism is the third pillar. It's the concept of 100% Americanism, and this arose from the founding of the American Legion to build national pride, advance patriotism, promote U.S. citizenship, educate young people, both mentally and physically alike, and to promote the U.S. Constitution. And the fourth and last pillar is children and youth. Since its founding in 1919, the American Legion has been a staunch supporter of children and youth. The National Commission on Children and Youth continues that commitment today as it seeks to improve the well-being of all children, the key to the future of a free and prosperous country, expressed by every generation of veterans and is held by children and youth today. And we touched on that children and youth last month with our Be the One program.
Correct. Well, now that we know how the American Legion started the national movement, let's take a look how it started in Plymouth. Now, prior to there being an American Legion in the United States, after the Civil War, there was a group put together of the Grand Army of the Republic. And believe it or not, they got themselves and formed an organization. And in Plymouth, they were the second post in the state of Wisconsin. It was called the Davidson Post. One criteria that was, and it kind of sets up the demise of an organization like that, is you had to be in the Civil War. And by 1930, and so, you know, the organization obviously dissolved because there were no more members involved in the Civil War.
Okay.
So, but the concept of the organization itself was used by the American Legion. So, that being said, after the war ended on 11/11/1918, there were many promises and pledges to those that served in that war. So to make sure veterans had a voice in Congress, the American Legion was founded, as you said, in March of 1919. Plymouth again responded to the call for having Congress held accountable for those that served. The first meeting of the Ladwig Zinc Graft Post was held on April 8, 1920 at the Plymouth Library at 8 p.m. Okay, you know, my past life I was a fact finder, and so the big question came up, why is it called the Ladwig Zinc Graft Post? Now, there were 9 war casualties of World War I in Plymouth. 2 died as a result of wounds suffered in combat, 7 as a result of maladies that, well, for today would have been treatable. So doing some old newspaper research accounts and a book written by the company commander of the 127th Infantry, I believe the charter members selected their namesake based on what I found. So, a popular song heard frequently during that war was a Civil War tune, When Johnny Comes Marching Home Again. Well, not all the Johnnies came home.
Correct, yeah.
Again, there were 9 that didn't come home, and 2 Plymouth residents were members of the 32nd Division, 127th Infantry Company C, Wisconsin National Guard. So it's 105 years ago that these two men left with the Sheboygan contingent for the war to end all wars. So, Ladwig, Walter A. Ladwig, born May 8th, 1890. Walter came from a very patriotic family. He had two brothers, Edward and Herbert, that also served in World War I. Walter had a thriving meat market in town, and by all accounts, he was a real heartthrob for the ladies. However, Walter was severely wounded by a shell fragment from a German machine gun in August of 1918. Walter was partially paralyzed and underwent several operations only to succumb to his wound on September 6, 1919, which, if you look at those dates, the war is over with, at Fort Sheridan Army Hospital in Illinois. He is buried at Woodlawn Cemetery, Plymouth. Full military funeral rites were conducted by the future charter members of the Plymouth American Legion. Walter was 29 years old at the time of his death. Now comes a very interesting story. Clarence Zincraft, born June 27, 1895, and he was a painter by trade. Now, Clarence attained the rank of corporal and had a brother, William. Brother was the supply sergeant for Company C. Clarence fought in 7 major campaigns with Company C. For the longest time, Clarence was listed as missing in action. In fact, in that book that I mentioned that was written by Company C Commander Paul Schmidt about the exploits of Company C, brings up Clarence, and he refers to the missing Corporal Zincraft as if the earth had swallowed him. Now, as I was researching, it was not until July of 1919, and only with the help of the Wisconsin United States Senator Robert LaFollette, that the family found out that Clarence died on the battlefield during the last major campaign of the war called the Argonne Offensive. The Army then lists Clarence as killed in action on October 4th, 1918. And excuse my pronunciation of some of this. And he is buried at the Meuse Argonne Cemetery in Remagen, France. And Clarence was 24 years old at the time of his death. So we just gave you a brief history, the start of the American Legion and how the post started in Plymouth. So hopefully some of those questions that I had, maybe you had, have been answered. So presently we are working on some future shows. And again, any ideas, throw them our way. I've already heard a couple of things, and we'll work on those. Okay. So until the next time, we want you to stay mentally and physically strong, and we really appreciate you taking the time and watching.